It's tabletop time. I'm Jazza.
I'm Dave.
And we're going to be talking about world building today. Hey, look, we're standing in front of our worlds. This is my world.
This is my world.
Some of you might be watching this years into the future when we have our major motion picture and Netflix series and award-winning line of toys in Walmart.
Yeah.
But these are the humble beginnings, and it all begins with the core ideas and story that you put together. This is going to be a bit of a mishmash of some different things because we're going to be looking at World Anvil, and it's going to end up being a little bit of a semi-tutorial because I'm going to show Dave some of the ropes of things that I learned and used. It's also going to be a bit of a behind the scenes as to how I built some of Sunder, and it's going to be a bit of a review from your experience of some of the features that you find useful using World Anvil in prepping for Reboot Season 2.
Yeah, this will be kind of my experience as a first timer coming into World Anvil and using it.
And for any of you who have been interested in trying World Anvil and maybe tried it but also didn't quite know where to start, hopefully this video will be really helpful to you. You can go to tabletoptime.com/Sunder and that will take you to this. This is my World Anvil page. This is the public page, and using World Anvil you can make a public page that you share with your players or your audience to show all of the juicy details of the world that you put together. So I kind of went a bit over the top because it was really fun, especially as I was preparing everything. So the timelines is where I started, and it's just really fun to be able to do this in categories, and it sort of helps you build and flesh out the world.
Timelines is always, I've long stood by this. It's been one of my favorite things because I've always categorized things. I've always done timelines. When I'm like jotting down stories or doing D&D campaigns, I'd always run a horizontal timeline. Just think it helps. And for Reboot, there's a lot of events that are really important because it's a world of developing technology, and it's something that in Sunder, I guess, you have these like a century passes, whereas for me, it's more like 2074, this thing happened, which led to this thing in 2076. So yeah.
Also putting it out there keeps you on your toes. We had a budding theory group for both campaigns, and it definitely makes you want to remember all the details when other people are like, remember everything. So go check out this page just for a bit of a brief as to the world that I built if you're interested or you followed Sunder. This is just a bit of an overview as to some of the things you can do. There's so much more you can do. Maps is one of my favorite things, especially because I'm a very visual person. I commissioned this map, brought this in, put all the markers in. It's interactive, so I can click on here, go into Greydale and see all the towns, and then you can further subdivide. It's not always littered with all the tiny towns players may not interact with, but they're there if I want to find them. Regions, which I love. For example, if I turn on the resources, there are different resources that are produced from these different regions. And that's just in my world building. If I'm like, you're traveling from this area to this area, I know there's gonna be more wheat fields as opposed to livestock. And then I can sort of build that into the towns, and it helps you improvise and helps your players sort of picture where they are a bit more, especially if they have that sort of brain.
Yeah, well, I think I'm planning on making a map of the northwestern suburbs of Melbourne for Reboot.
I'm so stoked.
And there'll be a video about that on Tabletop Time.
Yeah. Now, you don't have to commission maps, and you'll probably get some cool custom art for yours.
I'm probably, the scope is probably going to be taking an existing, like a Google Maps, and then doing an overlay of it because, I mean, it's based on a real location.
Yeah, so you can definitely get creative, and there are loads of resources out there. I actually used one, this is Gelderdale, and this is actually a procedurally generated one. I just sort of clicked through until I got one that I liked, and then I could fine tune it and tweak it and shape it.
Yeah.
And then I sort of broke it up again into districts and regions. I find it super helpful. And then when I'm carrying my players through the story, I know you enter through there and you have to go through the political district. And if you end up wanting to find the military district, I know where you're going through. I get to picture it all in my head.
I can see me using this for the gang turf.
Yeah.
And then I was also thinking for, you said resources.
Yeah.
So, well, there's drug, in the gangs, it's like drugs, guns, who runs the guns, who runs the drugs.
I love that as a player. We'll get into some of the behind the scenes of how to like make some of this stuff yourself, but the place to get started is worldanvil.com/iinspire. They're giving 40% off of all of their year-long memberships. This is actually their biggest level of discount for all year level discounts. So no matter what stage, if you want to sort of go on the smaller end, I'm a game master, I'm a writer. If you want to go bigger, if you have an audience, you want to build public profiles, 40% off everything for a year. Go check it out. Links in the description, worldanvil.com/iinspire. They've sponsored this video and all of the Sunder season that I ran. So I'm excited to show you the ropes through there. And the first thing you'll be greeted with is your login page. So I'm actually showing you behind the scenes of the World Anvil page that we have. I kept this up here because I love this. This shows exactly how they run it. The pop-up of Janet showing a new feature.
Okay.
I hadn't seen this before because they update this all the time based on community feedback, and the more you use World Anvil, the more voting points you get to vote on features that they next develop, which I think is amazing. It means high-powered users get to impact on what is prioritized, which is amazing.
That is cool.
So the whiteboards feature is a new feature, and you can check that out. Meanwhile, they have obviously news feeds and all this stuff, but everything is accessible from this dashboard. It can be a little overwhelming. I'm going to be completely honest. I know when I went here first, I was like, where do I start? And this is before I was sponsored by them. So I was like, is this for me? Is it not? And I didn't quite know how to go about it, but I started with one thing I knew I wanted, which was timelines. So in clicking timelines here, you can see on the left, there's a whole bunch of different things. The first thing I'll point out is there are little videos on every single one of these pages that are guides, but you can close them off if you're done with them. So I don't have them on a lot of them because I've watched them and I've used them. But if I go to ones I haven't used a lot, let's say content trees, if I click on that, there's the guide to content trees. Also, if you get lost, do you need help? I've never clicked this before.
I want to click it.
I'm a kinesthetic learner. There's the click.
Okay, join us in Discord.
Take you to the Discord and I think they're super active. So I started off in timelines, and as you can see, I've got a master timeline and parallel timeline. So you can have sub timelines that feed into the master timeline, and I loved that and just got stuck into it. You can get even more like in depth, like you can have multiple like time eras. I really have been scratching the surface, and I've had so much that I've been able to do already. Then I moved on to articles. I see it as building the chunks of your world as things you might present to either players or your audience. And it's also a super useful reference for you to come back to be like, oh, how did these things work? I also ended up using articles really heavily as my regional plot point builders. So an example of that would be if I go to my Fellbrook, this is my plot article for Fellbrook. None of this was public, but this is what I had open every session.
Okay.
I had beats that I thought, okay, can we get brick drunk, cactus, alcohol, Egyptian drinks? Like as we're playing, players are asking questions, and I'm like, okay, I want to answer some of these questions in the next session, or I need to add to the world building. So I'll note that as I go. It's my stuff I need to work through, but also stuff I think I need to remind myself that might come up. And I gray things out that have been done, and bold characters, which is just Control B. Like it's just a normal sort of WYSIWYG word editor, which I find super useful. And then I group by chapters. I can just move them up and down into different groups. It helps my brain understand how to serve this stuff. This is also a great example too, where like I have the current running stuff at the top, but lower down I have some of the media stuff that either has been said or needs to come up again. So this in the Fellbrook, I wrote the final prophecy in here. And when I surfed it to the players, I read it from here. And then when Jen wrote a letter, or Catalina wrote to her mother, I copied that Discord message in here so I could read it to the players and reference it. And all of this is associated on the back end with Fellbrook, the region where all this happened. I find that super useful. There are other ways you can keep track of this stuff. They have like diaries and notes and stuff, but I think it really just comes down to how different people navigate this sort of software. Then I moved on from that to maps, and this is where you can sort of sink your teeth into pretty heavily, but I'll just do a surface level for you because I showed you how it works on the front end. On the back end, if you're doing a map and you want to do regions, I'm just going to go into edit the Geldervale map. And so this is the map I had here. You can see I've got districts. That's a separate drop-down thing. And this is all done through the marker. Create a new marker. You choose between these. You want to make a polygon.
Okay.
So first I want to make my districts visible so I can see my other polygons. I'm going to select polygon, and then you move this arrowy thing so that the pointy bit is going to create a node, right? So I move that there, and when I check this, it's sort of active, right? So check this and drag and drop every time it'll mark it. So I'm gonna drag it and drop there again, boop, it's made that marker. Drag and drop down here, boop, and maybe I wanna just map these western farms. Oh, don't wanna move you, boop. And it's sort of adding a new node point at every drop. Maybe I want to go up the river. I'm just sort of dragging and dropping. And then all you need to do is sort of remember where your first advanced options or whatever, but I'm just going to create the marker for now. That's created, and then I can change the color styles. I'll edit my Western Farms marker. All right, so let's say I want the outline color to be brown. I'll just grab the hex code for that, pop that in outline color, and I'll go like lighter for the fill color, copy. I'll go outline opacity is 100, fill opacity is 50. So when I save that, when I zoom out and make my districts visible, there you go. I've got my Western Farms mapped out. Another thing which I haven't done, which I wanted to do, which you could do, is you can have layers of images. So you could have a map in theory that has like a destructed version, or like when a battle has taken place and you know a city will be destroyed, you can layer that on as an artwork on top that is invisible until you make it visible or public. So there's actually so much you can do for interactivity and a dynamic result. But aside from that, the last thing I wanted to mention, which I think will be really useful to you and some of you watching, is what's called the storyteller screen. You can go to your storyteller screen by clicking up here on your notebook. Don't look. We'll edit out spoilers.
Perceiving. I'm looking without perceiving.
Okay. You can navigate from a bunch of pages or from the campaign page. Opening your storyteller screen is where you can start a session, you can serve content to party members, things like secrets, maps, articles. If you encounter a creature that you've worked on, you can share that with the party with a click. Notes is the tab I find super useful. I've used it for all my magic note taking. So if I need to refer to what can be done in any magic class, I have that there. I have party notes, story notes, encounter ideas, and then everything else like media, plot devices, articles, and character sheets. All that stuff is in here in the storyteller screen. So this is like still surface level stuff. Like you can see how deep the rabbit hole goes, and someone else's experience of how they would use World Anvil and what they'd make as a result will be totally different, which is, I think, a testament to how comprehensive and robust World Anvil is. But I think it also comes down to the individual user. So I'm going to hand it over to you, and we're going to make a brand new world. We just click this little drop down button here. I've got Sunder. I'm going to click New World.
What is it called?
I'm not gonna fill any of this. I'm gonna leave it all to you.
Bloody
but
Melbourne.
one thing I will say that I highly recommend, and this was actually highly recommended in one of Janet's like guide videos, is for one of the first things you do to fill out what they call your world meta. And I followed that advice. I filled in my world meta. It basically asks you a bunch of questions about the philosophy of the world, your motivation as a GM, what you want the players to feel like, what you think the overarching themes are, what are your goals of the project, all of this stuff. And I answered stream of consciousness. You can read it. I made it public. And I love that after having gone through season 1, I can go back and read the world meta and be like, yeah, I did it. Like, I did exactly what I wanted to do, and it's all there in the world meta. And I think it's a really cool way to start the ball rolling and send yourself into the world building experience. And also, from our perspective, the content creation experience. So, it's your turn, Dave.
So I've come upstairs to my desk to start exploring World Anvil on my own, and I'm looking forward to building Reboot in this system. Now, my campaign setting I'd previously made, and I basically used a system of Word documents and Excel spreadsheets. And the longer the campaign runs on, the more cumbersome that becomes. I'm looking forward to some of the aspects of World Anvil that Jazza showed me. So when I'm building any kind of world, I usually start with a timeline. So the first thing I want to do is build a world history. One of the great features of timelines is the ability for you to tell a world's narrative in small snippets that are easily digestible by the players. The first thing I wanted to do is establish where or when it started. Now, as I'm building this timeline after season 1, there are a few pieces of information that have already been established, and a few limiting factors in how the world works that I have to be aware of. So I know 2 major dates. Rob's character is 35 years old and is genetically engineered, which means when I develop this timeline, I need to think that 35 years prior to 2090 is when he was born. So I start my timeline around 2032. As I move through and develop this timeline, I'm picking out these key points that set up the world for 2090. It's quite likely there are huge geopolitical events happening at the time, but the players don't really need to know or think about that unless it's impacting the story that they're playing. So I focus on anything that will breadcrumb potential plot threads in the actual campaign. As we move further down the timeline, rather than chronicling every major corporate or company move or advance in technology, I'm focusing on the technologies related to the characters in the setting. I include the founding of Rob's character's parents' company, as well as the founding of the Reboot company, which is pretty prevalent in the setting. Now, the more I explored the timeline features, the more I started to experiment. When it came to the cybernetic evolution section, I took advantage of the ability to have full-length articles in the timeline, as well as shorter length, to keep the timeline nice and neat and deliver the basic information, and allowing there to be more for those who wish to dive deeper. I started to use the linking articles feature, which fast became one of my favorite features on the site. Being able to have a brief article about the founding of a company, which then leads to a more in-depth article describing their history, which can then link further on to characters that are associated to that company, I think is a really cool tool and one I've loved to explore. Building these webs of connection is something I try and focus on when I'm developing my roleplay worlds. It's important that a world feels lived in and real, and humans have vast networks and connections, especially when they're in similar fields. Making sure that the characters in the world feel like they're not just isolated agents that don't affect anyone else is really critical to making the world feel lived in and like an actual functioning society. With the timeline well underway, I wanted to do something a little bit different. We have an awesome artist at Tabletop Time, Alicia. I'm going to ask her to help me use her artistic talent to turn modern Melbourne into Reboot's 2090 Melbourne. It made sense to start with a map of Melbourne. I took some screen grabs of this, so I had a clean map, as well as a map with references with street names, place names, and streets highlighted. This way I could give all of these to Alicia, and she'd have really good references as she developed the map. Alright, so Alicia, I've come upstairs because I have some maps for Reboot that I want to make magic. And we're very lucky to have Alicia on as our in-house artist, which is something most roleplay groups don't have the privilege of, but we're going to take advantage of it. Now, Reboot, of course, is set in Melbourne in 2090, and a lot has changed. But what I've done is I've made a folder full of very high-resolution screenshots. This is actually the paper for me to do some sketches on. Okay. So I'm going to sketch out some, changes that have happened, but while I start doing that, I thought you could start sort of vibing it out and maybe doing some photo bashing to make it look a bit more cyberpunk.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool.
Sounds good.
So while Alicia gets started making some templates and photo bashing some stuff, I'm basically doing some quick overlays. For example, this black area here, which I'm using a color-coded Sharpie for, is going to be the exclusion zone, which is basically an area of the city that has been completely vacated and no one's allowed to live. And these gold areas that I'm starting to highlight, they represent the strips in the Ven, which is basically where all the nightlife and stuff happens. So they're loosely based on shopping districts. I'm a Victorian, so I am vaguely familiar with Melbourne. So I'm sort of picturing where it could evolve into nightlife districts, shopping areas. So I'll keep doing that. There's lots to do. Waterways I need to expand due to rising water levels and things like that. And then we'll see what Alicia can come up with. The inner city of Reboot in Melbourne is a bright, populous, almost utopian sci-fi setting. Expanding out from that, there is a buffer zone of completely abandoned and derelict buildings where no one is allowed to live or even trespass. Beyond that, we have two major areas of slums. There's the slums where people mass and congregate in their thousands to millions. And then there's the more expansive slums where all city services like sewage and electricity no longer function or are supported. These blackened, charred, burnt out, and damaged areas have long since been destroyed by rioting, fighting, and are now the habitation of wild and unruly people who don't fit even in slum society. One other final consideration was rising sea levels, so I got Alicia to flood out a whole bunch of the rivers and creeks and slightly change the geography of the area. Also of note, turned a racecourse into a forest, which, again, may be explored in Season 2 of Reboot. Using World Anvil's features, I quickly got to grips with what Jazza had showed me. I could use pins with different symbols to create short articles, but these could also be linked to articles and to the timeline itself. Establishing the locations, gangs, individual people of repute, where they operate from, how they operate, the map really pulls it all together. I think this visual reference is going to be an amazing tool for my players, and you at home can use the map tool to turn any map you take, whether it be a free sourced or commissioned fantasy map for your setting, or just some screen grabs like I took from Google Earth. World Anvil's maps feature with the regions, the tabs, the
the pins, allows you to turn these images into a living map that your players can understand. Oftentimes in Season 1, we had issues understanding where the gangs were, where the locations were relative to each other, because we were using Theatre of the Mind. So I love the region system here, as we can clearly see gang boundaries and borders. And if the campaign progresses and things change, I can actually adjust those borders as we play. Now there is heaps to explore in World Anvil, and I'm only just getting started. Establishing a campaign, making homebrew rules, painting a huge amount of tiles and miniatures in a limited space of time are all very demanding but very rewarding. But I feel like it's World Anvil and the Reboot page I've made that I'm going to continually go back through throughout the course of the campaign to update, add to, and change. So if you're following along with Reboot, I'd love it if you could follow along with my Reboot World Anvil page. Check back there and see how it gets updated and explore the world. Learn a little bit more about it and create your mad theories. I also hope that my players will be able to use it as a really useful resource to continually check back on and refresh their understanding of the game world. I do feel like this is only just the beginning. I'm pretty confident and happy with what I've learned, how I can use World Anvil, and I can't wait to expand it for you all and for my players as we go forward. Thank you once again to World Anvil for helping us bring back our campaigns with Ironspire, and I look forward to continue using World Anvil throughout Reboot. I do want to thank our patrons as well, our roleplay patrons, for all your lovely support, all your wild theories, and really diving in and getting involved with us with our campaigns. It is super fun to go on this journey with you, to share in our Twitch after parties in Discord, and to generally just hang out and enjoy the enthusiasm. It's really rewarding as a creator, and I'm really grateful for it, so thank you. I hope you have as much fun exploring my Reboot World Anvil page as I did making it, but remember, this is only just the beginning. I've been spending a lot of time painting miniatures and sets for Reboot, but they're done now. So it leaves me with my planning time to keep building this World Anvil page. So without further ado, I'm gonna get back to it. Are you still here?